Jamal Carter slumped in his polished Atlanta office, eyes fixed on a shaky viral clip. Him, bruised and cuffed, hauled off Vanessa Hart's live set after shredding her racist jabs with a razor-sharp comeback. 10 million views in 12 hours screamed triumph, yet his gut churned. His tech empire's stock had crashed overnight, whispers branding him a fame-chasing fraud. The wind felt like ash. What no one saw coming. This was just the fuse Vanessa, lit for a brutal war ahead. How deep would her vengeance cut? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against all odds. Smash that like, hit subscribe, and stick around for a wild ride. Exposing raw truth. 2 weeks before the chaos hit the fan, Jamal Carter paced the cramped backroom of his sleek Atlanta office, a space carved out of grit and late nights, prepping for the spotlight he'd earned. At 38, he'd turned a scrappy app-coded, in his grandma's garage, into a billion-dollar tech empire, a beacon for kids like him from the cracked sidewalks of Southwest Atlanta. Today was his shot, a live slot on Heartline, Vanessa Hart's glitzy talk show that ruled the city's airwaves. He adjusted his navy suit, crisp and tailored, smoothing the lapels with hands that still remembered the weight of a wrench from his mechanic days. His reflection in a cracked mirror showed a man who'd fought tooth and nail, calm brown eyes masking the fire beneath. This wasn't just an interview. It was his chance to tell the world how a black kid from the projects rewrote the rules of a game stacked against him. Across town, Vanessa Hart lounged in her plush dressing room, a peroxide blonde queen perched on a throne of controversy. Her show was a machine, churning out gasps and headlines, and she was its heart, cold and calculating. At 45, she'd clawed her way up from local news to a national name, her sharp cheekbones and sharper tongue a perfect storm for TV gold. She thrived on tearing down anyone who dared shine too bright, especially if they didn't fit her narrow mold of deserving. Jamal's story rags to riches. Black excellence in a whitewashed tech world rubbed her raw. Her hazel eyes flicked over a dossier on her vanity, courtesy of a shadowy producer named Rick, a weasel-faced man who lived for dirt. Sealed juvie record, he'd whispered earlier, sliding it across her desk with a grin. Petty theft, age 15, enough to rattle him. Vanessa's lips curled into a venomous smile, her perfectly capped teeth glinting under the lights. She didn't care about celebrating Jamal's climb. This was her arena, and he was fresh meat. The studio buzzed as Jamal stepped onto the set, a cavernous space drenched in blinding lights and the hum of a restless crowd. Rows of seats stretched back, filled with folks from Buckhead suits to Edgewood dreamers, all eager to see the hometown hero. He settled into a stiff leather chair across from Vanessa's sleek desk, the air thick with anticipation. She strutted out moments later, heels clicking like gunfire, her emerald blazer hugging her frame. The audience roared, a mix of loyal fans and curious newbies, but Jamal caught the glint in her eye, predatory, unyielding. He kept his posture steady, shoulders square, offering a warm smile that radiated humility over arrogance. His hands rested loose in his lap, fingers tapping a rhythm only he could hear, a habit from coding marathons that kept him grounded. Vanessa perched on her chair, legs crossed tight, her clipboard balanced on one knee. She leaned forward just enough to signal control, her pen tapping a staccato beat against the paper. Each click a countdown to chaos. The cameras rolled, red lights blinking alive, and the room hushed as her voice cut through, syrupy sweet with an edge lurking beneath. "Welcome to Heartline, Jamal," she purred, her tone light but laced with something jagged. "You've been stirring up quite the storm lately, Atlanta's golden boy, revolutionizing tech from the ground up. People can't shut up about it." She paused, letting the praise hang, then tilted her head, her smile tightening. "But tell me, do you think luck played a bigger role than talent in getting you here? I mean, from the projects to a penthouse, that's a leap most don't make." The question landed like a jab, subtle but barbed, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Jamal didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, felt the sting of doubt from teachers who'd told him to aim low, from suits who'd smirked at his accent in boardrooms. He tilted his head, considering her words, then leaned in slightly, his voice smooth as polished steel. "Luck's a funny word, Vanessa. I'd call it hustle. Grew up with nothing but a dream and a beat-up laptop. Took that and built something no one saw coming. Talent's just the spark works the fire. His eyes locked on hers, steady and unflinching, a quiet challenge in their depths. The audience stirred, a few clapping, others nodding, drawn in by his calm defiance. Vanessa's smile didn't budge, but her grip on the pen tightened, the tapping quickening. She'd expected him to squirm, to stumble under the weight of her implication that a black man from his corner of the world couldn't climb that high without a crutch. His answer was too clean, too poised, and it irked her. She shifted in her seat, her blazer catching the light, and tossed her hair with a practiced flick. "Hustle, hug," she said, her voice dipping into a mocking lilt. "That's a pretty story. But let's dig a little deeper, shall we? Not everyone gets a seat at this table." Her eyes narrowed, a predator sizing up prey, and Jamal caught the shift the game was on, and she was loading her. Next shot. Backstage, Rick hovered near the control booth, a headset pressed to his ear, barking orders to the crew. "Get the graphic ready." He snapped, his voice low and oily. "The mugshot, she's about to drop it." A tech nodded, fingers flying. Over a console, pulling up the grainy black and white photo Vanessa had been itching to unleash. Rick smirked, glancing at the monitor where Jamal sat, oblivious to the trap tightening around him. Vanessa's elite backers, old money types who hated seeing outsiders like Jamal thrive, had greenlit this hit. The mayor's office had even nudged her along, a favor for campaign cash she'd funneled their way. This wasn't just a show. It was a takedown, and Jamal was walking blind into the jaws. Out front, the crowd leaned in, sensing the shift in the air. Jamal kept his cool, his smile steady, but his fingers paused their rhythm. Resting still on his knee, he'd come to share his journey. Single mom, no dad. Nights coding by flashlight. When the power got cut, he'd expected questions, maybe skepticism, but not this. Vanessa's words carried a weight he knew too well, the kind that came with sideways glances in elevators, with "you don't belong" etched into every closed door he'd kicked down. He'd built his company, Nexus Tech, on solving problems apps that streamlined shipping, saved small businesses, put money back in pockets like his mom's. Now, sitting under these lights, he felt the old fight bubbling up, the one he'd buried under success. Vanessa flipped a page on her clipboard, her nails clicking against the edge, a sound that grated like nails on chalk. She'd played this game before, needling guests until they cracked, feeding her audience the drama they craved. Jamal wasn't. Her first target last month, she'd shredded a Latina chef over handouts that never existed, but he was her biggest. His billion-dollar valuation, his magazine covers, his quiet swagger, it all threatened the world she and her backers ruled. She glanced at the teleprompter, then back at him, her smile widening into something feral. "You're a smooth talker, Jamal," she said, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "But I'm curious, how does a guy like you really break into tech? It's not exactly your neighborhood's specialty." The dig landed harder this time. The racism naked now, and the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the third row clutched her purse, lips pursed, while a guy near the back muttered something sharp under his breath. Jamal's jaw tightened. Just for a split second, a flicker of the kid who'd punched a wall after a cop roughed him up for looking suspicious at 16. He let it pass, exhaling slow, and met her gaze head-on. "My neighborhood didn't hand me a playbook," he said, his tone even but firm. "I wrote my own. Check the patent 73, all mine. That's how I broke in. Outworked the room, every time." Cheers broke out loud and jagged, slicing through the tension. A cluster of teens in the corner whooped, fists raised, their energy raw and real. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the swell, her pen freezing mid-tap. She'd underestimated him, figured he'd dodge or deflect, not swing back with facts and fire. Her smile twitched, a crack in the mask, but she recovered fast, leaning back with a chuckle that didn't reach her eyes. Well, she said, her voice tightening. "You've got the crowd eating out of your hand. But we're just getting started, aren't we?" She glanced at the camera, a signal to cut to commercial, but her stare lingered on Jamal, promising more. In his office, Jamal had prepped for tough questions. Rehearsed his story how NexusTech's first app cut shipping costs for mom and pop shops. How he'd slept on floors to fund it. He'd pictured a stage to inspire, not a battlefield. Now, sitting here, he felt the shift. Vanessa wasn't interviewing him. She was hunting him. And as the lights dimmed for the break, he caught Rick's smirk backstage. The dossier clutched in his hand. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't just words, it was war. And Jamal was already in the crosshairs, his empire teetering on the edge of her next move. The studio lights flared back to life, bathing Jamal Carter in a harsh glow as the Heartline crowd settled into a restless hum. Vanessa Hart leaned forward, her emerald blazer glinting like a blade, her hazel eyes locked on him with a hunger that made the air feel tight. She'd tasted his defiance in the first round, and now she was ready to sink her teeth in deeper. "We're back with Jamal Carter," she announced, her voice smooth as silk but edged with steel. "Atlanta's tech wonderkind who says hustle got him here. But let's peel back the curtain a bit, shall we?" She paused, letting the silence stretch, her pen resuming its relentless tap against the clipboard. "Tech's a tough nut to crack, a white man's game, some might say. So, Jamal, how does someone like you really climb that ladder? Luck, or maybe something else?" The question slammed into the room like a brick through glass, nakedly racist, and the audience sucked in a collective breath. A guy in a Falcons cap near the front winced, hands clenching his armrests, while a woman with braids in the fifth row muttered something fierce under her breath. Jamal's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his smooth brown skin, but he held steady, refusing to let her see him bleed. He'd faced this before, venture capitalists who'd asked who's really behind this, while staring past him, cops who'd frisked him outside his own building for fitting a description. He tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips, and leaned into the mic. "Someone like me?" he echoed, his voice low and measured, dripping with calm. "You mean someone who doesn't quit? I climbed by outworking everyone in the room. Check the patents, Vanessa, 73, all mine. That's not luck, that's proof." The crowd erupted, a jagged wave of cheers crashing over the set. A cluster of college kids in the back jumped up, fists pumping, their shouts raw and electric. Jamal's words hit like a thunderclap, turning Vanessa's jab into his spotlight. But her smile didn't falter, it hardened, her lips pressing into a thin, venomous line. She'd expected him to dodge, to stammer, not to swing back with facts that made her look small. "Outworking everyone, huh?" she said, her tone sliding into a sneer as she flipped a page on her clipboard. "That's a bold claim, but let's talk reality." She nodded to the control booth, and the massive screen behind them flickered to life, flashing a grainy mugshot. Jamal at 15, hollow-cheeked, staring defiantly into the camera. "Petty theft, juvie record," she declared, her voice ringing out. "A criminal past explains a lot, doesn't it? Maybe that's the hustle you mean." Gasps rippled through the seats, sharp and uneven, like a storm breaking. A man in a suit near the aisle shook his head, muttering, while a teenage girl clutched her phone, already filming. Jamal's chest tightened, the old wound torn open, stealing a candy bar to eat when his mom's check didn't stretch far enough. A dumb kid's mistake he'd paid for 100 times over. Vanessa's producer, Rick, smirked backstage, arms crossed, savoring the chaos. She'd landed the hit, and the crowd's stunned silence was her reward. But Jamal didn't blink. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, his smile widening into something fierce. "That's fuel, not a flaw," he said, his voice steady as granite. "Poverty taught me hunger to build, not break. I turned that into NexusTech. What's your excuse for digging up a kid's past instead of facing the man I am now?" The room detonated again, applause thundering so loud the cameras shook. A woman in a red dress stood, clapping furiously, her eyes blazing with pride, while a guy in a hoodie hollered, "Tell her, Jamal." Vanessa blinked, her pen freezing mid-tap, caught off guard by the swell of support. His clapback was gold raw, unscripted, flipping her smear into a badge of grit. The clip was already racing across social media, racking up views as phones lit up in the stands. Jamal felt the shift, the energy tilting his way, and for a moment, he thought he'd won. He'd turned her cheap shot into his triumph, a story of resilience that had echoed beyond this stage. But victory was a mirage, and Vanessa wasn't done carving. She recovered fast, tossing her hair with a brittle laugh, her nails clicking against the desk. "Well, you're quite the storyteller," she said, her tone icy now. "But let's not get carried away." She leaned back, crossing her arms, ready to reload. Jamal kept his cool, his hands resting loose, but his gut whispered trouble. He'd humiliated her on her own turf, and she wouldn't let that slide. As the show cut to another break, he stepped off set, wiping sweat from his brow, the crowd's cheers still ringing in his ears. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his CFO, Lena, her voice tight with panic. "Jamal, we've got a problem. Investors saw that mugshot. They're spooked, pulling funds left and right. Stocks down 20% since the broadcast started." The words hit like a sucker punch, stealing the air from his lungs. He'd walked in here to lift Nexus Tech higher, not watch it bleed. 20% in and our millions evaporating, because Vanessa had dredged up a ghost he'd buried. He paced the green room, the roar of the crowd muffled through the walls, his mind racing. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice low, steadying himself. Lena's sigh crackled through the line. "Bad enough. Big players are bailing, say it's reputation risk. We're scrambling. But you need to get ahead of this." Jamal nodded, jaw set, already plotting. He'd sue if he had to, spin this into a comeback. He'd faced worse and won. But as he hung up, a chill crept in. Vanessa's smirk flashed in his mind, to smug, to prepared. This wasn't just a jab, it was a calculated strike, and the real damage was still unfolding. Backstage, Rick huddled with Vanessa in her dressing room. The dossier spread across her vanity like a war map. "Told you it'd stick," he said, his voice slick with glee. "Twitter's eating it up. Half call him a thug, half a martyr. Either way, he's bleeding cash." Vanessa traced a finger over the mugshot, her smile curling into something feral. "Good," she purred, "but we're not done. He thinks he can dance around me? Let's see how he handles the next round." She tapped her clipboard, a new plan brewing, her elite backers' whispers echoing in her ears. "Crush him. Keep the ladder theirs." Jamal had no idea the machine he'd just provoked, its gears already grinding to dust his empire. Out front, the audience buzzed, replaying the clash on their screens. The viral clip hitting 1 million views before the break ended. Jamal's words, fuel, not a flaw, became a rallying cry. A fist raised against doubt, but the stock drop gnawed at him, a crack in the armor he'd forged. He'd built Nexus Tech to prove the doubters wrong, to lift his mom out of a crumbling duplex, to show kids in his old block they could dream big. Now, Vanessa's cheap trick threatened to yank it all away. He straightened his tie, steeling himself to return to the set. He'd fight always had. But as he stepped back into the lights, his phone buzzed again, a text from Lena. "It's worse. Check the news." His heart sank. What had Vanessa unleashed now? "Yo, what do you think did Jamal just turn Vanessa's trap into his win? Or is she playing a dirtier game than he knows?" Comment number 1 if you're rooting for Jamal to keep swinging. Hit like if you're pissed at Vanessa's low blow. And smash subscribe for the next drop. This clash is just heating up. Was that mugshot a fair shot, or a racist gut punch? Tell us below. So what's Vanessa got up her sleeve to twist the knife deeper? Stick around, things are about to get wilder. Jamal Carter barely slept that night, holed up in his Atlanta office. A glass tower perched over a city that felt like it was turning on him. The viral clip from Heartline looped on his laptop, his Clapback racking up views, now at 3 million, but the triumph soured fast. Nexus Tech's stock had tanked 20% in hours. A bleeding wound Vanessa heart had sliced open with that mugshot stunt. His team scrambled, phones buzzing with panicked investors, but Jamal's mind churned harder. He'd faced setbacks, lawsuits, tech flops, but this felt personal, a knife aimed at his core. By dawn, he'd rallied his CFO, Lena, and a skeleton crew, plotting to stabilize the company. "We've got cash reserves," he said, pacing the hardwood floor, his voice steady despite the shadows under his eyes. "Push a press release, my story, unfiltered. We'll ride this out." But Vanessa wasn't waiting. By noon, a new clip hit the web, slick and vicious, shared from her show's official account. It was Jamal's words from the broadcast, twisted by editing so clean it felt real. "I'll outwork everyone by any means," his voice growled. The last phrase looped to sound like a threat. Blogs pounced, Thug Tech CEO exposed, screamed one headline while trolls flooded his inbox with slurs, calling him a gangster in a suit. His phone lit up with screenshots, each uglier than the last, and his chest tightened as the hate poured in. Vanessa had taken his defiance and spun it into a noose, tightening it with every retweet. He called Lena, his jaw clenched. "This is doctored. We've got the raw footage prove it's fake." She hesitated, her voice low. "We're trying, but it's spreading too fast. Damage is done." He couldn't sit still. Jamal grabbed his keys, storming out to confront Vanessa's team at the studio, a squat brick building off Peachtree Street. The air hung heavy with exhaust and tension as he pushed through the glass doors. His navy suit rumpled from the sleepless night. A receptionist flinched at his glare, stammering, "Ms. Hart's not here," but he spotted Rick, the producer, slinking toward a back exit. "Hey," Jamal barked, striding over, his 6-foot frame towering as Rick froze. "Pull that clip." "You know it's a lie." Rick smirked, his weasel face twitching, and shrugged. "Truth's optional, man. Ratings aren't. Take it up with Vanessa, she's calling the shots." Jamal's fists balled, but he held back, knowing a swing would only feed their narrative. He left, fuming, and drove back to Nexus Tech, the skyline blurring past his windshield. He'd sue, expose the edit, claw his way out same as always. But as he pulled into the parking deck, a crash shattered the silence. A brick sailed through his office window, glass exploding across the pavement 30 stories below, and he slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. He leapt out, scanning the lot. No one, just shadows and the echo of tires peeling away. The brick lay in the rubble, jagged and heavy, with an asterisk our thief scratched deep into its side. His stomach lurched, the slur a punch to the gut, rawer than any troll's email. He called the cops. Voice tight, but when 2 officers rolled up, white, burly, badges glinting, they barely glanced at the brick. "You provoked this," one grunted, scratching his neck. "Heard you got heated on TV. People react." Jamal stared, disbelief burning into rage. "Provoked, that's your take." The cop shrugged, scribbling a half-assed report, while the other smirked, muttering, "Stick to coding, howshot." They left, tires crunching gravel, and Jamal stood alone, the slur glaring up at him from the debris. He'd seen the script cops who'd hassled him as a teen, letting rich kids slide while he got cuffs for less. But this wasn't just bias. It was a wall, and Vanessa had built it. He snapped a photo of the brick, texting it to Lena with a clipped evidence. "We're fighting back," she called instantly, breathless. "Jamal, this is bad, but it's bigger." I dug into Hart's funding her shows tied to Mayor Grayson. Campaign money, shell companies. They're in deep. The name hit like a jolt. Grayson, Atlanta's slick, silver-haired mayor, a fixture at galas and ribbon cuttings. Jamal had met him once, a handshake at a tech summit, all smiles and empty praise. Now it clicked. Grayson's old money cronies hated Nexus Tech's rise, a black-owned juggernaut stealing their shine. Vanessa wasn't just a host. She was their weapon, and that brick was their warning shot. "He's protecting her?" Jamal asked, his voice low, piecing it together. Lena's sigh crackled through. "More like she's protecting him. Her ratings prop his image tough on troublemakers." "You're the perfect target." Jamal's mind raced, the stakes doubling. A lawsuit wouldn't just be against Vanessa, it'd mean taking on City Hall, a machine that crushed louder than it bent. He sank into his car, the leather cool against his back, staring at the shattered window above. He'd built Nexus Tech to defy odds, 73 patents, a staff of hundreds, apps that saved struggling shops. Now it teetered because Vanessa had painted him as a thug, and Grayson's cops let the hate fly. His phone buzzed. Lena again. "News just dropped. They're calling you unstable. Stocks down another 10%, 30% total, a third of his empire bleeding out in a day." He gripped the wheel, knuckles whitening, and muttered, "They want a war. They'll get one." He'd sue, expose the edit, drag Grayson's name into the mud if he had to. He'd fought bigger beasts and won poverty, skeptics, a system that never wanted him to rise. Back at Heartline headquarters, Vanessa lounged in her office, a glass of peanut in hand. Watching the chaos unfold on her tablet, the doctored clip had hit 5 million views. Comments a cesspool of vitriol she savored like fine wine. Rick, slouched in a chair across from her, scrolling Exy's toast, he said, grinning. Investors are running scared stocks a freefall. Vanessa sipped her wine, her smile curling into a razor's edge. Not yet, she murmured. He's still standing. That little speech of his, fuel, not a flaw. People ate it up. We need more. She tapped her glass, plotting, get me something juicier. He's not slinking away that easy, Rick nodded. Already texting a contact, a fixer with a knack for planting trouble. Vanessa leaned back, her blazer unbuttoned, the city skyline sprawling beyond her window. She'd crushed guests before, politicians, chefs, even a pastor who dared cross her, but Jamal was different. His calm, his fire, the way he turned her trap into his stage it gnawed at her. Grayson had called that morning, voice smooth but firm, keep him down, Vanessa. He's too loud, too visible, she'd agreed, not just for the mayor's cash, but for the thrill of breaking a man who dared defy her world. The brick was a start, a message from her shadow crew, but she needed blood, not just bruises. Jamal spent the afternoon with Lena, drafting a legal salvo, defamation, libel, anything to claw back control. His office buzzed with tension, staff whispering as they tracked the stock's nosedive. He stood at the shattered window, glass crunching, under his boots, staring at the brick's ugly scrawl. It wasn't just an attack, it was a dare. He'd grown up dodging worse gangs, evictions, nights with no food, but this was a beast he hadn't faced, a system weaponized by wealth and hate. Vanessa, its grinning front woman. His phone pinged a news alert. Nexus Tech CEO faces backlash. Criminal past sparks outrage. The doctored clip played beneath, his voice warped into a snarl. He slammed the phone down, breath ragged. They're not stopping, he said, to Lena, who nodded grimly. Then neither do we. As dusk settled over Atlanta, Jamal drove home, the city's glow mocking his unraveling day. He'd sue, sure, but Grayson's shadow loomed larger than he'd guessed. Cops who wouldn't lift a finger, a mayor who'd rather see him sink than shine. The brick sat on his passenger seat, a jagged reminder of the fight ahead. He'd turned a candy bar theft into a billion-dollar dream, outworked every doubter. But Vanessa's machine was relentless. His phone buzzed again. Lena, urgent. Check. X, it's escalating. He pulled over, heart sinking as he opened the app. A new hashtag trended. Hashtag Jamal the Thug, flooded with threats, memes, and a photo of his car outside the studio, someone watching, waiting. Vanessa's next strike was coming, and it'd be uglier than anything he'd braced for. Jamal Carter hunched over his desk in the dim glow of Nexus Tech's Atlanta headquarters, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette beyond the taped-up window. Where that brick had crashed through yesterday, the air smelled of coffee and stress. As he pored over legal drafts with Lena, his CFO, her laptop casting a blue sheen on her tense face. Vanessa Hart's doctored clip, his voice twisted into a menacing snarl, had torched his stock. Another 10%, now down 30 total. And the hate online was a roaring wildfire. But Jamal wasn't folding. He'd sued, filing defamation papers that morning, and by noon, a judge, young, sharp, untainted by Grayson's grip, ordered Vanessa's fake video yanked from the web. The ruling hit X like a bomb, trending under hashtag Justice for Jamal, and his stock ticked up 5 points as fans rallied. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. Social media lit up with fire clips of his fuel, not a flaw, Clapback remixed with beats. Posts hailing him a warrior against racism's ugly face. Vanessa's done, one tweet crowed, racking up thousands of likes. Jamal scrolled through it all on his phone, the buzz a bomb after days of bleeding. His team buzzed around him, fielding calls from investors trickling back. And Lena cracked a rare smile. We're stabilizing, she said, tapping her screen. Small wins, but they're adding up. Jamal nodded, his navy suit wrinkled from 48 hours straight, and stood, stretching his stiff frame. Small wins build big ones. He said, voice steady, let's take it public show and we're still standing. He scheduled a press conference for dusk, a chance to reclaim his narrative from Vanessa's claws. The conference went down outside Nexus Tech's glass facade, the sun dipping low, painting the crowd in gold. Hundreds gathered, reporters, supporters, kids from his old block waving signs. Jamal built this. He stepped to a makeshift podium, mic in hand, his breath fogging in the crisp evening air. I'm Jamal Carter, he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, and I'm not here to play victim. Vanessa Hart tried to bury me with lies, doctored clips, dug up pasts, but I've got proof. He held up a stack of emails leaked from a whistleblower on her team, showing her plotting to target black guests for years. This isn't about me, he said, eyes sweeping the crowd. It's about a system that punishes us for rising. I'm fighting for every kid told they can't. The crowd roared, phones flashing, a wave of raw energy washing over him. Stock ticked up another 3 points, mid-speech 8 total now. He felt unstoppable, a king reclaiming his throne. Vanessa watched from her plush office, wine glass trembling in her grip as Jamal's words streamed live on her tablet. Her show's account was hemorrhaging followers, the yanked clip a public gut punch, and Rick paced behind her, muttering curses. He's winning the PR war. He snapped, tugging at his tie. Vanessa's smile was gone, replaced by a snarl as she slammed the glass down, red splashing the desk. He's not winning anything, she hissed. He's a cockroach squash. Him harder. She'd underestimated his spine, his ability to flip her hits into fuel. And Grayson's late-night call still rang in her ears. Finish this, Vanessa, or we're both exposed. She nodded to Rick, her voice low. Make it. Stick this time. Jamal wrapped the conference, fist raised to cheers, the crowd's heat chasing the chill from his bones. He stepped off the podium, shaking hands, feeling the tide turn. A kid in a hoodie, maybe 16. All elbows and dreams gripped his arm. You're why I code, he said, eyes wide. Jamal grinned, clapping his shoulder. Keep pushing. Man, this is for you. He headed to his car, a black SUV parked curbside, replaying the moment, his story, his truth, finally breaking through. The stock wasn't back, but it was climbing, and the lawsuit had teeth. He slid into the driver's seat, exhaling, thinking he'd dodged the worst. Then sirens wailed, sharp and sudden, slicing through the dusk. Two cop cars screeched up, lights flashing, boxing him in before he could turn the key. Doors flew open for officers white, stone-faced, hands on holsters storming toward him. Jamal Carter, you're under arrest, one barked, yanking his door wide. Assault, downtown bar, 2 hours ago. Jamal froze, mind reeling. What? I've been here all day, check the footage. The cop smirked, grabbing his arm, twisting it back as cuffs snapped on. Tell it to the judge. Tough guy. Cameras clicked, the crowd gasping as he was perp walked past them, his suit jacket snagging on the cruiser's door. A woman screamed, this is bullshit, but the cops shoved him in, tires squealing as they peeled off. His victory dissolved in seconds, a mirage shredded by steel and lies. The precinct was a concrete maze, fluorescent lights buzzing as Jamal sat in a holding cell, wrists raw from the cuffs. The assault was a ghost-staged fight at a dive bar he'd never set foot in. Pinned on him by a paid witness Vanessa's crew had greased. He'd been on camera all day, provable, but the cops didn't care. Witness says you threw the first punch, a sergeant grunted, tossing a flimsy report on the table. Jamal's voice stayed level, steel beneath the calm. I've got alibi. Tapes, hundreds saw me. This is a setup. The sergeant shrugged, flipping the page. Tapes can wait. You're staying put. Jamal's gut twisted. Grayson's fingerprints were all over this. The mayor's reached, choking justice before it could breathe. Vanessa hit the airwaves an hour later. Her heart line set aglow with smug triumph. From CEO to suspect. She crowed, her blazer swapped for a crimson dress that screamed victory. Jamal Carter's little press stunt didn't last long, did it? Sources say he's behind bars assault. Caught red-handed. Told you he's trouble. Her smile was a blade, slicing through the screen as viewers ate it up. The hashtag #JamalTheFug. Spiking again, Rick grinned backstage. Texting the fixer nailed him. Vanessa leaned into the camera, her voice dripping with mock pity. Guess that hustle has a dark side. Stay tuned, we've got more. She'd turned his win into ash. Grayson's muscle flexing through her every word. Jamal's lawyer, Marcus, a weary ex-prosecutor with a boxer's grit, stormed into the precinct at midnight, slamming a tablet on the desk. He's on live feed all day. Your witness is a liar. Let him out. The sergeant squinted, unimpressed, but Marcus pushed. Grayson's puppet judge won't hold this bails. Set, move. Jamal walked free an hour later, cuffs off, but the damage was a crater. His phone buzzed. Lena, voice shaking, presses all over it. Stocks slipping again. Investors think you're toxic. He rubbed his wrists, the precinct stink clinging to his clothes, and muttered, they planned this. Marcus nodded, grim. Vanessa's not alone. Mayor's pulling strings. Judge stalled your release till the news hit. This is war, Jamal. He drove back to Nexustech, the city a blur of neon and shadows, replaying the arrest. Cops' smirks, the crowd's stunned faces. He'd won the lawsuit, owned the press conference, felt the ground firm up beneath him, only to have it yanked away by a lie so bold it choked him. That kid's words, "You're why I code," echoed, a lifeline in the wreckage. He'd built this for them, not just himself, and Vanessa's machine wouldn't rip it down without a fight. But as he pulled into the lot, his phone lit up with a news alert. Carter's arrest sparks outrage and doubts. The bar fight tale was unraveling, but the smear stuck, and Grayson's shadow loomed larger. Vanessa's next hit was coming, and it had aimed to kill. At her penthouse, Vanessa sipped wine, watching the arrest clip loop online. 6 million views. Her ratings soaring. Rick sprawled on her couch, scrolling updates. He's out, but he's limping, he said, smirking. She nodded, her eyes glinting with malice. Good. Let him limp. Then we crush him. Grayson's call came through. Voice clipped. Keep it tight, nothing traces back. He's too loud. Vanessa purred agreement. Already plotting the next strike. Jamal thought he'd dodged a bullet, but she'd loaded a cannon. His empire hung by a thread, and she'd snip it clean. Jamal Carter sat on a cold steel bench in an Atlanta holding cell, the air thick with sweat and bleach, his wrists still stinging from cuffs that had bitten too deep. The precinct's fluorescent buzz drilled into his skull. 48 hours, stretching into a lifetime after Vanessa Hart's staged arrest, snatched his press conference victory away. Guards strutted past, their boots clacking on concrete, tossing slurs like grenades. Tech boys soft now. One sneered, a beefy guy with a buzz cut, his badge glinting under the harsh light. Should have stayed in your lane. Another barked, spitting tobacco into a cup. Jamal kept his head up, jaw tight, staring at the pockmarked wall. He'd faced worse, cops rousting him as a kid for walking home late, but this was a cage built by power, not just prejudice. His suit hung wrinkled, the navy fabric stained with precinct grime, a far cry from the king he'd felt addressing. That crowd, the assault charge was a sham, a bar fight he'd never been near, pinned on him by a witness Vanessa's fixer had bought. His lawyer, Marcus, had proof-live footage from the conference, but the system didn't care. Bail hearing came fast, and the judge, a graying crony with Grayson's golf handicap, stared down from the bench. Public safety risk, he drawled, slamming the gavel. Denied. Jamal's stomach dropped. The word a brick in his gut. Grayson's reach wasn't just rumor, it was steel, locking him in while Vanessa danced on his grave. Outside, Aisha, his younger sister, hit the streets running, her braids whipping as she rallied a protest at the precinct steps. She was 32, fierce, a nurse who'd patched up Jamal's dreams since they were kids, sharing a sagging mattress. Free Jamal, she shouted, megaphone crackling, her voice a blade through the humid night. Hundreds joined her, coders, barbers, moms from their old block chanting his name. Signs bobbing, justice now. Phones glowed, streaming it. Live, the hashtag Free Jamal spiking to 1 million hits. Aisha's eyes blazed, her fists clenched as cops in riot gear loomed, batons tapping palms. He's no criminal, she roared. They're scared of what he built. The crowd surged, a tide of rage and hope shaking the city's core. Inside, Jamal heard the muffled chants. A lifeline through the bars. He paced the cell, 6 by 8 feet of concrete hell, replaying the judge's smirk. Grayson's puppet had stalled justice, letting Vanessa's CEO to cell block special air that night. She'd preened on screen, crimson dress hugging her frame, spinning his arrest into a morality tale. From podium to prison, she'd cooed, her voice syrup over venom. Guess that hustle's got a rap sheet now. Fake experts piled on psychologists. Ex-cops trashing his character, calling him a time bomb. Views hit 8 million. Her ratings soaring as Nexus stock slid another 5 points. Jamal's hands balled, nails digging into palms. He'd beat this, he had to. Marcus worked the angles, digging into the witness, a greasy, barfly named Eddie with a rap sheet longer than Jamal's arm. Paid off, Marcus muttered over a jailhouse call, his voice tight. Caught him on a burner phone with Rick. We've got the tape, glitch proves you were clear. 48 hours in. He stormed the precinct with it, slamming the evidence down. The sergeant, a lanky guy with a perpetual scowl, squinted at the file, then shrugged. Technicality. He grunted, signing release papers. Jamal walked out. At dawn, free but battered, the crowd's cheers a faint echo as Aisha rushed him, hugging tight. You're out, she breathed, her eyes wet. He nodded, forcing a smile, thinking he'd dodged the bullet. He was wrong. That night, he crashed at his loft, a sparse space overlooking the Chattahoochee. Exhaustion pulling him under. A crash jolted him awake, glass shattering, metal groaning. He bolted upright, heart slamming, and ran to the window. Nexus HQ, 3 miles away, glowed under floodlights, but chaos reigned. Vandals had hit servers smashed, desks flipped, walls tagged with "go back" in dripping red paint. His phone buzzed. Lena, frantic. They trashed it. Jamal. Hardware's gone, data's at risk. He sped over, tires screeching, riving to a war zone. Cops milled around, useless. One kicking a shard of glass with a smirk. Looks personal, he said, shrugging. Jamal's blood boiled. The brick, the slurs, now this. Aisha grabbed his arm, whispering, they're not stopping. He surveyed the wreckage, servers sparking, years of code teetering on ruin. Nexus wasn't just a company, it was his defiance. 73 patents forged from nights when hunger gnawed his gut. Now, Vanessa's machine had gutted it. Grayson's shadow fueling the fire. Security cams? He asked Lena, voice raw. She shook her head. Disabled inside job. Someone on his team? The betrayal stung, but he shoved it down, barking orders to salvage what they could. Aisha hovered, her nurse's comm cracking. This is war, she said, eyes scanning the dark. They want you broken. Jamal nodded, jaw set. Then, they'll have to try harder. But the weight pressed heavier, stock down, HQ trashed. His name a punching bag. Vanessa watched the vandalism news from her penthouse, a smirk playing on her lips as she swirled her pinnet. Rick sprawled on her couch, scrolling X. HQ's a mess, stock's toast, he said, grinning. Your special sealed it. She nodded, her eyes glinting. Karma's real, she murmured, echoing her broadcast, savoring the irony. Grayson's call came through, voice clipped. Good. Keep him buried, nothing links us. She purred agreement, already plotting. The protest had rattled her. #free Jamal trending to loud, but this hit would silence it. Jamal thought he'd slipped free, but she'd cracked his foundation, and the next blow would shatter it. Jamal spent the night at HQ, glass crunching under his boots, directing techs to recover drives. His phone buzzed. Marcus, grim. Cops won't investigate, called at random. Grayson's got him locked. Jamal's chest tightened, the system's teeth sinking deeper. He'd walked out of jail, felt Aisha's arms, heard the chants, thinking he'd turned the tide. But this was a gut punch. Racial hate scrawled across his life's work, and no one with a badge cared. He sank into a chair, staring at the red paint dripping down a wall. The words a mirror to the bricks slur. They're coordinated, he said to Lena, voice low. Vanessa, Grayson, someone inside. She nodded, eyes dark. We're bleeding. Jamal, stocks at 40% down. We need a miracle. Aisha stayed close, her presence a rock as he wrestled the chaos. She'd seen him climb coding by flashlight, dodging bullets in their old block, and fall wouldn't come easy. "You've got this," she said, squeezing his hand. But doubt not jail, vandalism, a witness bought like candy, Vanessa's. Special played on a muted TV, her smug face taunting him. He'd beaten the cell, sure. But this hit harder, aimed at his soul. His empire teetered, investors fleeing, and Grayson's machine roared louder. He stood, brushing glass off his sleeve, resolve hardening. "We fight," he told Aisha, "always have." But as dawn broke, the red paint gleamed wet, a promise of worse to come. Hey, real talk, what's your take on this? Comment number 1 if you think Jamal's grit is unbreakable. Hit like if Vanessa's dirty game makes your blood boil. And smash subscribe to catch how deep this rabbit hole goes. Is the system too rigged for him to win, or will he flip it again? Tell us below. So, what's Vanessa cooking up now that she's trashed his HQ? Another lie, or something bloodier? Buckle up, the storm's just getting wilder. Jamal Carter stood amid the wreckage of NexusTech's Atlanta headquarters, the dawn light glinting off shattered glass and twisted metal, the red "Go Back" scrawl dripping like blood down the walls. His sister Aisha hovered nearby, her braids pulled tight, her nurse's hands restless as techs salvaged sparking servers. The vandalism had gutted his empire stock down 40%. Data hanging by a thread, and Vanessa Hart's smug CEO to cell block special still echoed in his ears. But Jamal wasn't done. He'd survived jail, turned her mugshot stunt into fuel, and he'd damn well climb out of this too. "We're not dead yet," he told Lena, his CFO, voice rough from no sleep. "Launch a crowdfunding campaign, full transparency. Let the people decide if I'm finished." Lena hesitated, her laptop balanced on a busted desk, then nodded. "Risky, but it might work. Stocks toast, investors are ghosts." Jamal paced, boots crunching glass, his navy suit a tattered flag of the war he'd fought. "Then we don't need M," he said, eyes hard. "This started in a garage, let's take it back to the streets." By noon, they fired it up, #SaveNexusTech, a raw video of him in the rubble. Voice steady, "They trashed my dream because I'm loud, black, and winning. Help me rebuild for every kid like me." It hit the web like lightning, shared by coders, moms, teens who chanted #Free Jamal outside the precinct. $5 million poured in by dusk, a tidal wave of small bets, $10, $20, $50 each, a fist raised against Vanessa's machine. The crowd chanted his name again, virtual this time, and Jamal felt the ground steady beneath him. Stock crept up 10 points in a day, a fragile pulse, and his loft buzzed with hope as he watched the numbers climb. Aisha cooked spaghetti in his kitchen, the smell grounding him, and grinned. "You're back, big bro. They can't keep you down." He nodded, cracking a smile, the first in days. $5 million wasn't enough to fix it all. Servers alone cost millions, but it was breath, a lifeline. His phone glowed with messages. "You're our hero, don't let M win." And for a moment, he believed it. He'd turned Vanessa's latest hit into his rally, the people's cash, a shield against Grayson's shadow. NexusTech would rise, stronger, a middle finger to the suits who'd bet on his fall. He slept that night, deep and dreamless, thinking he'd turned the corner. Then the axe fell. Morning broke with a news alert shrill, insistent, tripping him awake. NexusTech CEO stole app idea. Whistleblower claims. His gut sank as he clicked the link. A grainy PDF splashed across X, internal docs, forged to perfection, alleging he'd swiped his first app's code from a white intern named Chad Bowers 5 years back. The whistleblower, a senior dev named Trey, bribed by Vanessa's crew, smirked in a video, claiming Jamal took credit, pushed Chad out. "I've got proof." Media flipped overnight, CNN, Fox, blogs calling him a fraud, a thief in a suit. Donors screamed for refunds, $5 million evaporating as fast as it came. And stock plummeted 15 points before breakfast. Jamal stared at the screen, spaghetti cold in his stomach, betrayal a knife in his ribs. Aisha burst in, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Trey, he's lying, he worshipped you." Jamal's voice was steel, masking the quake beneath. "He's bought." Vanessa's desperate. He called Lena, who was already at HQ, voice shaking. "It's bad." Jamal crowds outside, protesters, not supporters, signs say thief, were hemorrhaging. He sped over, the city a blur, pulling into the lot to face a mob 50, 60 strong picketing his glass tower. Liar. They yelled, hurling eggs that splattered yellow across the doors. Give it back. A woman in a denim jacket spat as he pushed through, her face twisted with rage he didn't earn. He'd built Nexustech from scratch, Knight's coding till his fingers bled. Number intern named Chad ever in the mix, but the lie stuck, slick and poisonous, inside. He traced the forgery to Vanessa's producer, Rick, digging through Trey's emails on a salvaged server. A payment 50 grand, wired through a shell link to Heartline's budget. Got him, he muttered, forwarding it to Marcus. File it, conspiracy, defamation, all of it. Marcus grunted over the line. It's thin, they'll bury it. Grayson's got the courts. Jamal's jaw tightened, the red paint still glaring from the walls. He'd rallied the crowd, felt their love, only to watch it sour on a dime. His phone buzzed. News again. Carter's HQ vandalized, now raided, drugs found. Cops stormed in as he read, boots thudding, tearing through the wreckage. Warrant, one barked, flashing paper, and Jamal froze as they found baggies of white powder in a desk, planted, obvious, but damning. The raid was a circus, cameras outside, cops smirking as they cuffed him again, dragging him past the mob. Drug lord now, huh, one sneered, twisting his arm till it burned. Jamal's voice stayed level, a rock in the storm. Check. The cams, it's a setup. They ignored him, shoving him into a cruiser. The crowd's booze a dull roar in his ears. Vanessa had flipped the script again, turning his crowdfunding win into a double gut punch. Thief, then dealer, each lie uglier than the last. Grayson's machine hummed, the warrant signed by the same judge who'd denied his bail. And Jamal knew this wasn't random. It was a noose, tightening with every move he made. At the precinct, he sat in a cell again, the stink of bleach sharper now, his suit a rag of sweat and dust. Marcus arrived, slamming the bars, planted. They didn't even hide it well. We'll fight this. But Jamal's eyes were distant, replaying the eggs, the signs, Trey's smirk. $5 million. A lifeline from people who'd believed. Gone because Vanessa's crew knew how to twist trust into hate. His empire wasn't just bleeding, it was choking. Stock at 55% down, HQ a crime scene. He'd built it for his mom, for Aisha, for kids like that coder at the conference. And now it dangled by a thread, Grayson's shadow strangling it slow. Vanessa lounged in her office, watching the raid live on Channel 5, her crimson dress swapped for a black blazer. Sleek and triumphant, Rick perched on her desk, scrolling Jamal the Thug's back 10 million hits. He crowed. Donors are done, he's toxic. She sipped coffee, her smile a razor. Perfect, let him squirm. Grayson's voice crackled through her. Speakerphone, clipped and cold. Clean hit, no blowback. He's finished, she nodded, savoring the wreckage. The crowdfunding had rattled her. 5 million from nobodies, a slap to her elite world, but this was checkmate. Trey's lie, the drugs, the mob, she'd turned Jamal's people against him, and he'd never see it coming. Jamal's cell buzzed with a text from Aisha, slipped through by a sympathetic guard. I'm safe, HQ's locked down. We'll fix this. He clutched the phone, her words a spark in the dark. He'd rallied them once, felt their fire, only to watch Vanessa snuff it with a lie so bold it burned. The intern was fiction, his first app born from a shipping glitch he'd cracked alone. But the drugs, planted by hands he couldn't trace. Grayson's cops grinning as they framed him. Stock was a corpse, his name poison, and the crowd's love had flipped to hate. He stood, pacing the cell, resolve hardening despite the weight. They want me broken, he muttered. Not today. But as the guard's boots echoed closer, he knew Vanessa's next hit was already loaded, and it had aimed for his heart. Jamal Carter slumped against the cold concrete wall of his Atlanta cell, the air thick with mildew and despair, his navy suit now a tattered shroud of the man he'd been. The drug raid at Nexustech, baggies planted in a desk he never used, had landed him back in lockup, wrists raw from cuffs, stock cratering at 55% down. 2 inmates, hulking shadows with shaved heads, loomed in the corner, their eyes glinting with menace. Fancy CEO, Huh, one growled, cracking knuckles. Think you're better. The guards watched from the hall, smirking, arms crossed. As fists flew, Jamal took a punch to the ribs, breath exploding out, then another to the jaw. Blood trickling warmed down his chin. He fought back, swinging wild, but they pinned him. Boots slamming his gut till he curled, gasping, "Stay down." Tech Boy, a guard, chuckled, spitting on the floor before strolling off. Released on bail after 12 brutal hours, Jamal staggered out, a shell of himself. Ribs aching with every step, Marcus, his lawyer, met him at the gate, face grim. "They're animals filing assault charges on you now. Say you started it." Jamal's laugh was bitter, blood flecking his lips. "Started it. They jumped me." His phone buzzed. Aisha, hospitalized from protest clashes, her arm broken by a cop's baton. He sped to Grady Memorial, the city a blur of neon and pain, finding her in a stark white room. Eyes fierce despite the cast. "I'm fine," she rasped, gripping his hand. "But you look at you." He sank into a chair, head in hands, the weight crushing him. Stock gutted, HQ trashed, sister hurt, name poison. Vanessa had won this round, and he felt it in his bones. Her voice haunted him, replaying from that muted TV at HQ. "Karma's real." She gloated on her latest Heartline special, black blazer sharp as a blade. Spinning the drug bust into a triumph. Jamal Carter's empire's crumbling gas. He's not so golden. Ratings soared, 10 million viewers lapping up the lie. Her smug face a taunt he couldn't shake. He'd rallied 5 million from the crowd, felt their love, only to watch it rot with Trey's betrayal and planted drugs. Now Aisha's pain, her fight for him, cut deeper than the bruises. He stood, pacing the hospital room, resolve flickering. "I'm not done," he told her, voice hoarse. "They hit us, we hit back." He dug deep, hacking Rick's email from a burner laptop in Aisha's room. Fingers trembling, but precise skills from nights cracking code as a teen. Pay dirt, a thread between Rick and the fixer. Timestamps tying the drug plant to Vanessa's orders. "Gotcha," he muttered, leaking it to X from an anonymous account. The post blew up to million views in hours. Hashtag Vanessa exposed trending as fans roared back. Jamal's clean, stock twitched up, a faint pulse, and donors trickled in again, a whisper of hope. He leaned back, Aisha's steady breathing beside him, thinking he'd turned it. The email was a lifeline, proof her machine wasn't invincible. He texted Lena, "Push it hard, show the world." She fired back on it, "We're alive," but the rug ripped out fast. Morning broke with a call from Marcus, voice tight. Mayor's office moved, revoked NexusTech's business license. Ethical violations, they claim, citing the drugs and Trey's lie. Jamal's chest caved, the hospital's sterile hum deafening. "Revoked. They can't," Marcus cut in. "They did." Grayson's judge rubber stamped it. "Company's dead till we appeal." Dead, the word echoed. A sledgehammer to his skull, 5 million gone. Stock a corpse, HQA crime scene, now his license. The legal spine of NexusTech snapped like dry wood. He'd hacked Rick, felt the tide shift, only to watch Grayson crush it with a pen stroke. Aisha squeezed his hand, eyes blazing. "They're scared, Jamal. That's why." Vanessa's next show aired that night, a victory lap in crimson lipstick and a tailored suit. From CEO to nothing, she crowed, leaning into the camera, her smile a venomous slash. "Jamal Carter's license is gone. Guess that hustle couldn't save him. We've got exclusive footage." Nex's confession. Jamal watched from a motel, a dingy hole off I-85 where he'd crashed after leaving Aisha. The TV's flicker his only light. Confession. His gut twisted. He'd said nothing, confessed to zilch. But Vanessa's tease hung heavy, a guillotine blade poised to drop. Stock was at 60% down, employees jumping ship, and his name was mud. He'd exposed Rick, sure, but Grayson's counter hit harder, stripping his empire bare. He paced the motel's threadbare carpet, ribs throbbing, replaying the beating, Aisha's cast, the red paint at HQ. He'd built NexusTech for them, mom, sister, kids in his Block 73 patents from a laptop that sparked in the dark. Now it was Ash, Vanessa's machine, grinding it to dust. His phone buzzed. Lena, near tears. "Staff's quitting, license news broke. We've got nothing left." He sank onto the bed, Springs creaking, the email leak a fleeting spark, snuffed by Grayson's fist. "We've got me," he said, voice low. "That's something. But doubt Claude jail, vandals, drugs." Now this, Vanessa's confession loomed, a shadow he couldn't dodge. At her penthouse, Vanessa sipped Pinot, watching the license. Revocation hit headlines, her smile curling like smoke. Rick sprawled on her couch, scrolling X. "He's a ghost, stock's dead, team's gone," he said, grinning. "Confession drops tomorrow, deepfakes flawless." She nodded, savoring the kill. Grayson's call came through, voice smooth. "No loose ends, he's buried. Keep it clean." She purred agreement, her eyes glinting. The email leak had stung. Vanessa exposed trending to loud, but the license was her ace, and the fake confession would seal it. Jamal thought he'd struck back, but she'd crushed his spine, and he'd never rise again. Jamal sat in the motel's gloom, TV muted, Vanessa's smirk frozen on screen. He'd hacked Rick, felt the crowd's flicker, only to watch Grayson rip it away. Aisha was safe, healing, but Nexustek is proof. His fight was a carcass. The beating had bruised his body. This broke his soul. He'd rallied them, 5 million strong. Tasted victory in that hospital room. But Vanessa's machine was a Hydra, cut one head. 2 grew back. His phone buzzed. "Marcus, urgent. Confession's a fake, they've got tech. We'll fight. But you're cornered." Jamal nodded, jaw set, ribs screaming as he stood. "Then we punch through," he said, voice raw. But as the TV flickered, Vanessa's tease replayed, and he knew the next hit would be a death blow. He drove to HQ at midnight, the lot empty, glass still littering the asphalt. The red go back glared under floodlights, a taunt he couldn't unsee. He'd exposed Rick, turned the tide for a heartbeat. But Grayson's license revocation was a guillotine, swift, final. Employees gone, stock a memory, and that confession looming like a storm. He'd built this for his mom's smile, Aisha's pride, kids who'd never know his hunger. Now it was rubble. Vanessa's racism, a blade that kept cutting. He kicked a shard of glass, the clink echoing. Resolve flickering. "Not over," he muttered, but the motel's shadows clung, and Grayson's machine roared louder, ready to bury him alive. Jamal Carter hunched over a chip table in his dingy motel room off I-85. The TV blaring Vanessa Hart's latest Heartline special. Her voice a venomous hum in the stale air. From CEO to nothing, she'd crowed last night, and now, the screen flickered with her promised exclusive footage, a deepfake. So flawless it stole his breath. His own face stared back, warped by tech, confessing in his voice, "I faked it all, stole the app, cooked the books." The lie hit X like a wildfire, 10 million views in hours. Stock flatlining at 65% down, employees gone. Nexustek a ghost. Jamal's ribs ached from the jail beating, his suit a rag of sweat and blood. But this cut deeper, a digital blade slashing his soul. He slammed the remote down, the plastic cracking, and stood, pacing the threadbare carpet. Vanessa had buried him alive, and Grayson's machine cheered her on. Aisha called from the hospital, her voice steady despite the cast on her arm. "It's fake, anyone with eyes can see it," she said, fierce as ever. "Fight this, Jamal." He nodded, jaw tight. The motel's a dull roar in his ears. "I will," he rasped, ribs screaming as he grabbed his burner laptop. He'd hacked Rick's email, exposed the drug plant, felt the crowd's flicker. Now he'd dig deeper. Hours bled into night, his fingers flying over keys, tracing the deepfake source. A lead emerged, a tech mogul, Victor Slade, CEO of Sladecorp, a rival Jamal had outshone years back with his shipping app. Emails linked Slade to Vanessa, a $50,000 wire for services. Revenge. Pure and vicious lad's pride stung by a black kid from the project's beating. Him at his own game. Jamal's blood boiled, a plan sparking. "Got you," he muttered, shutting the laptop. He tracked Slade to a gala that night, a glitzy affair at the Fox Theater. All chandeliers and champagne for Atlanta's elite. Jamal slipped in, hoodie swapped for a borrowed tux, ribs throbbing with every step. The crowd glittered suits, gowns, Grayson's cronies, but Slade stood out, a tall, silver-haired shark sipping bourbon near the bar. Jamal moved fast, cornering him by a velvet curtain, recorder hidden in his pocket. "Nice deepfake," he said, Voice low, eyes locked on Slad's. 50 grand to Vanessa worth it. Slade smirked, bourbon swirling in his glass. Too cocky to dodge. You're a pest, Carter. Had to swat you down, your little app stung. Jamal's recorder caught it all, the Glota gold mine, and he slipped out, heart pounding. He leaked it to X from a burner phone to million views by midnight. Hashtag Sladdy exposed trending as fans roared. Jamal's back. The tide shifted. A jagged swell of rage, online hashtags flipping from hashtag Jamal the Thug to hashtag Vanessa Lies. Millions slamming Slade in heart. Stock twitched, a faint pulse, and Jamal crashed at the motel. Adrenaline buzzing. He'd struck gold. Slad's admission was a crack in their armor. Proof Vanessa's machine wasn't untouchable. Aisha texted, "You're a B stressed now." He smiled. Our IBS easing for the first time in days, thinking he'd flipped it. Again, the gala ambush was his lifeline, a fist raised from the rubble. He'd lost everything. HQ. License, 5 million, but this was fire, and the crowd smelled blood. Vanessa's show would bleed, Grayson's shadow would shrink. He slept, dreaming of Aisha's grin, believing he'd turned the corner. Then the trap snapped. At 3 a.m., the motel door exploded inward, wood splintering as SWAT stormed in black vests, rifles up, no badges flashing. Down, they barked, boots thudding, and Jamal rolled off the bed, ribs screaming as he hit the floor. A shot rang out, glass shattering, and pain seared his shoulder hot, wet, blooming red. He gasped, clutching the wound, blood slicking. His fingers as the team vanished, tires squealing outside. No cops, no sirens, just a hit. Clean and brutal. He staggered up, vision blurring, the TV still flickering Vanessa's smug face. A bystander, some trucker in the next room, burst in, meaty hands pressing a towel to the gash. "Hold on, man," he yelled, dialing 911. Jamal's head swam, Slad's smirk flashing in his mind. This wasn't law, it was Slad's. Payback, Vanessa's cheer ringing in his ears. Paramedics hauled him to Grady, lights flashing. The trucker's shaky voice fading as they stitched him up. Heard M say, "Finish it, crazy." The guy muttered to a nurse. Jamal lay there, shoulder bandaged, blood crusting his torn tux, replaying the ambush. He'd exposed Slade, felt the crowd's roar, only to take a bullet from a ghost squad. Vanessa's show looped on the hospital TV, her closing line a taunt. "Justice served, Carter's done." She'd spun the gala leak already, calling it desperate lies, her ratings spiking as his blood pooled on that motel floor. Stock was dead. Nexus Tech a memory, and he was a hunted man, Grayson's machine flexing muscle he couldn't match. Aisha wheeled in, cast and all, eyes blazing through tears. "You're alive, that's what matters," she said, gripping his hand. "Slade did this, I know it." Jamal nodded, voice a rasp. Him and Vanessa. Gala hit M hard. They hit harder. She dug into Slad's ties, pulling hospital Wi-Fi on her phone, and found the thread. Slade Corp funded Vanessa's deepfake tech. A vendetta masked as business. "He's her bank," Aisha whispered. "Grayson's just the muscle." Jamal's mind raced, pain sharpening his edge. He'd ambushed Slade, turned the crowd, but they'd countered with lead, not lies. His empire was ash, his body broken, yet Aisha's fire kept him breathing. "We're not done," he said, squeezing her hand, resolve a flicker in the dark. At her penthouse, Vanessa watched the shooting hit late-night news, pennant in hand. Her smile a razor's edge. "Rick paced, scrolling X's alive. Slad's pissed," he said, voice tight. "Gala clips at 5 million backfiring bad." She shrugged, sipping slow. "Alive's fine, broken's better. Let M rage, he's got nothing left." Grayson's call crackled through, voice icy, sloppy. "Vanessa, clean it up, no traces." She purred agreement, eyes glinting. The ambush was Slad's call, her nudge, and Jamal's blood was her trophy. The gala leak had stung hashtag Slade exposed to loud, but a bullet silenced it, and she'd spin the rest. He'd risen, sure, but she'd crushed him flat. Jamal lay in the hospital bed, shoulder throbbing, the TV's glow casting Vanessa's smirk over him. He'd struck Slade, felt the crowd's pulse, only to watch it bleed out on that motel floor. Nexus Tech was gone, license revoked, stock dead, HQA ruin, and now his life hung by a thread. Aisha's research burned in his mind. Slads. Cash, Vanessa's strings, Grayson's fist. He'd lost everything, taken a bullet. Yet that flicker held. They're scared, he rasped, echoing Aisha's words. Good. But as the morphine kicked in, Vanessa's cheer, justice served, rang hollow. A promise of worse to come. Yo, what's your call on this insanity? Comment number 1 if you're screaming for Jamal to keep fighting. Hit like if Vanessa's evil genius has you shook. And smash subscribe to see this war explode. Is Slad's bullet the end of Jamal's comeback, or just fuel for his fire? Tell us below. So, what's Vanessa got left to throw another lie, or a bigger gun? Hang tight, this roller coaster's diving deeper. Jamal Carter lay in a sterile hospital bed at Grady Memorial. The beep of monitors a steady pulse against the chaos in his skull. His shoulder throbbed, bandaged tight where a SWAT bullet had grazed him. Slad's hired hit. Vanessa's cheer, still echoing from that motel TV. Blood crusted his torn tux, ribs ached from the jail beating. Anexistec was a corpse license revoked, stock dead at 65% down. HQA vandalized shell. But he was alive, saved by a trucker's quick hands. And Aisha's voice cut through the haze as she wheeled in, cast on her arm, eyes fierce. You're still here, she said, gripping his hand. That's enough. Jamal nodded, pain sharpening his edge. Enough to start, he rasped, resolve flickering beneath the wreckage. He grabbed his phone, shaky but sure, and went live from the bed, bloodied, unbowed. A warrior in a gown. This is Jamal Carter, he said, voice raw, camera trembling as he held it up. Vanessa Hart, Victor Slade, Mayor Grayson. They tried to kill me. Shot me in a motel cause I exposed their lies. Slad's gala tape, real. They're deepfake, fake. They trashed my company, framed me, beat me, cause I'm black and I won't break. His shoulder burned, blood seeping through gauze, but he pushed on. Nexistec's down, but I'm not. Help me rebuild for every kid they want silent. He posted it, collapsing back, breath ragged. Aisha squeezed his hand, whispering, you're crazy and brilliant. The video detonated 20 million views in hours. X ablaze with hashtag Jamal Lives, hashtag Slade exposed, spiking harder than ever. Riots erupted in Atlanta, streets clogged with protesters, coders, baristas, moms chanting his name, smashing windows near City Hall. Justice for Jamal, they roared, tires burning, air thick with fury. Vanessa's show got suspended, her smug face yanked off air as sponsors bailed, and Grayson faced indictments. Slad's leaked confession, tying him to the hit. Jamal watched it unfold on a hospital TV, news choppers buzzing overhead, a faint grin cracking his bruised face. Stock was dead, but grassroots cash poured into millions from small donors. A phoenix stirring in the ash. He was cleared of charges, the deepfake debunked, Nexistec reborn on the people's dime. He walked out 3 days later, shoulders slung, ribs taped. Aisha at his side as crowds cheered outside Grady. King's back, a kid yelled, fist raised. And Jamal waved, feeling the ground firm up. His empire was a seedling to million. Wouldn't rebuild it all, but it was alive, fueled by rage and love. Vanessa's suspension stung her. Grayson's indictment shook the machine. And Slade hid behind lawyers. His gala glowed a noose. Jamal crashed at Aisha's place, a cramped apartment in Decatur, plotting next moves. We're building again, he told Lena over the phone, voice steady, smaller, scrappier, real. She laughed, a rare sound. You're insane, it's working. He slept, dreaming of servers humming, thinking he'd risen from the flames. Then the phone rang at midnight, a number he didn't know, shattering the quiet. He answered, groggy, and a voice low, clipped hissed, check your mail, Carter. Aisha stirred, frowning as he stumbled to the box outside, heart pounding. Inside was a padded envelope, no return address, and he tore it open, dread coiling. Tight, a severed finger small, feminine, a chipped purple nail tumbled out. Blood crusted on the edge, a note taped to it. Back off, or she's next. Jamal's knees buckled, the world tilting as he recognized the polish Aisha's favorite shade. He spun, racing inside, but she was there, safe, staring wide-eyed. What's that? She whispered, then saw it, gagging. Not mine, she said. checking her hands, but the threat landed like a bomb. He called Marcus, voice shaking. Slad's goons, Aisha's their target now, Marcus cursed. Get her out, hide. That's no bluff. Jamal's mind raced, the finger a grotesque taunt. Slad's final screw you for the gala. Leak. He'd risen. Shirt 20 million views, riots. Cash flowing, but Vanessa's machine hit back. Not with lies, but blood. Aisha packed a bag, trembling. Her nurse's calm shattered. They're monsters, she said, eyes wet. For you. Jamal nodded, guilt clawing his gut. He'd exposed Slade, sparked a movement, only to paint a target on her back. They fled to a safe house, a buddy's spot in Marietta, windows dark, air tense. We're okay, he told her, but the finger's image burned proof they'd kill to win. Vanessa watched the riots from her penthouse, Pinnet trembling in her grip as news looped Jamal's bloody livestream. Her show was off air, sponsors gone, but she smirked, dialing Rick. He's alive, cute, she said, voice icy, finger. Shook him, though. Rick paced, phone to ear. Slad's unhinged says it's personal now. Grayson's sweating the indictment. She sipped, savoring the chaos. Good. Let M riot, he's got nothing left but noise. Grayson's voice crackled through later, sharp. Fix this. Vanessa. Slad's sloppy. No links. She purred agreement, eyes glinting. The livestream had backfired. 20 million saw her hand, but the finger was her ace. A silent scream to break him. Jamal sat in the safe house, a bare room with peeling paint. Aisha asleep on a cot, her cast a stark white slash in the gloom. His phone buzzed. Lena, breathless. To millions holding, protesters are funding us. You're a symbol. He nodded, shoulder throbbing, the finger's weight crushing his chest. He'd risen from that hospital bed, sparked a fire, watched Vanessa's show crumble. Grayson's empire crack. Nexus Tech was a seedling, scrappy and real, but Aisha's safety was the cost. Slad's goons had her scent, and that note, she's next, was a guillotine over his neck. He'd beaten jail, vandals, deepfakes, a bullet, thinking he'd won. But this was a wound he couldn't stitch. At Slade Corp's glass tower, Victor Slade raged in his office, bourbon splashing. As he slammed a fist on his desk, Carter's a cockroach won't die, he snarled to a hired fixer, a weary guy with dead eyes. Gala tapes killing me, stocks down 10%. The fixer nodded, pocketing cash. Fingers a start, next one's hers, for real. Slade grinned, a predator's gleam. Jamal's livestream had torched his rep, riots rattling his board, but he'd crushed the pest yet. Vanessa's nudge keep him scared fueled him, Grayson's muscle backing the play. The hit had missed, but Aisha was the prize, and he'd carve her to dust. Jamal's fire. Jamal stared at the finger, sealed in a bag on the safe house table. Aisha's breathing a lifeline in the dark. He'd risen 20 million strong, a movement born from blood only to watch Slade twisted into terror. Nexus Tech flickered, a dream reborn, but his sister's life hung by a thread. He'd exposed Slade, cracked Vanessa's armor, felt the crowd's roar, thinking he'd turned it. But that finger was a promise Grayson's machine wouldn't stop, and Vanessa's cheer was the soundtrack to his nightmare. He stood, shoulders stiff, resolve hardening. They want a war, he muttered. They'll get it. But as dawn crept in, the safe house felt like a cage, and Slad's next strike loomed, a shadow he couldn't outrun. Jamal Carter crouched in the dim safe house in Marietta, the severed finger's purple nail glinting in its plastic bag on the table. A grotesque taunt from Slad's goons. Aisha slept fitfully on a cot, her cast a stark slash against the peeling walls, her breathing a fragile thread in the silence. The note, back off, or she's next, burned in his mind. A death knell after his livestream's 20 million view roar had sparked riots and reborn Nexus Tech onto million in grassroots cash. Vanessa's show was suspended. Grayson indicted. Slade reeling, but that finger flipped it all. A bloody promise to crush him through her. He traced the threat, hacking burner logs from the safe house's shaky Wi-Fi, pinning the call to a warehouse off Old National Highway. They've got her in their sights, he muttered, shoulder throbbing from the SWAT bullet. Resolve stealing. Not tonight. He rigged a hidden camera tiny, clipped to his jacket, streamed it live to X, a lifeline if he didn't make it back. Going after Aisha's hunters. he whispered to the lens, voice raw, then slipped out, leaving her a note. Stay put, I'll fix this. The warehouse loomed 30 minutes south, a rusted hulk under a moonless sky, its windows dark but alive with shadows. Jamal crept in, boots silent on gravel, ribs screaming as he pried a side door. Inside, 5 goons slads muscle, leather-clad and armed circled Aisha, bound to a chair. Her cast cracked, blood trickling from her lip. "Where's your brother now?" one sneered. A weary thug with a scar slashing his cheek. Jamal's. Blood boiled, the live stream catching it all, 20,000 viewers spiking to 50 in seconds. He moved fast, a shadow with a pipe snatched from the floor, cracking the first goon's skull before they knew he was there. Bone crunched, the guy dropping limp, and the others spun, guns flashing. "Get him," Scarface barked, but Jamal ducked, swinging wild, pipe slamming ribs, knees, anything he could reach. A shot grazed his arm, hot and sharp, but he fought through, breaking a wrist, snapping a nose, blood slicking his hands. Aisha screamed, "Jamal, behind you," and he pivoted, pipe meeting a thug's jaw with a wet snap. For down, Scarface lunged, knife glinting. Jamal dodged, tackling him into a crate, fists pounding till the guy went slack. He cut Aisha free, her arms trembling as she clung to him. The live stream hitting 1 million views, raw and unfiltered. Cops raided minutes later, sirens wailing, but these weren't Grayson's puppets' new blood. Tipped by the stream, storming in with cuffs and shouts. "Hands up," they yelled, guns on Jamal. Aisha sobbing at his side. He dropped the pipe, bloodied and breathless, but the lead cop, a young black guy with a tight jaw, squinted at the scene. "You're Carter," he said, nodding to the camera still rolling. "This is self-defense, stream backs it." The goons groaned, cuffed, and Aisha's grip tightened. Her voice a whisper, "You saved me." Jamal nodded, ribs on fire, thinking he'd won her safe. Slad's crew busted, the world watching. But the trap wasn't done snapping. Vanessa hit the airwaves that night, her suspension lifted by a desperate network. Crimson suit sharp as she spun the warehouse fight on a late-night special. "He's a monster," she crowed, leaning into the camera, her smile a venomous slash. Jamal Carter's brawl proves it violent, unhinged. Sources say he started it. The live stream to million views now was twisted, clips edited to show him swinging first. Aisha's rescue cut out. X flared with hashtag Jamal the Thug again. Vanessa's ratings spiking as the crowd's love soured. Jamal watched from the safe house, Aisha bandaged beside him, fury boiling. They flipped it. He rasped, shoulder leaking through gauze. Again. Cops hauled him in at dawn. The same young officer now grim, cuffing him tight. Assault. With intent, he muttered, eyes avoiding Jamal's. Warehouse crews pressing charges, say you ambushed them. Jamal's laugh was hollow, blood crusting his arm. Ambushed. They had her check the stream. The cop shrugged, shoving him into a cruiser. Judge'll sort it. You're backin'. The precinct was a rerun bleach stink. Guards smirking, but this time, Aisha was safe, her hospital bed swapped for a cot at Marcus's place. Jamal sat in a cell, ribs a dull roar, replaying the fight. He'd saved her. Turned Slads hid into his stand, only to watch Vanessa frame it as his fall. Slade walked free that day, lawyers spinning the goons as security. His gala confession buried under cash and threats. He smirked on Channel 5, bourbon in hand. Carter's a thug proved it himself. Grayson's indictment stalled, his cronies circling wagons, and Vanessa's special sealed the flip. Jamal's rescue a crime. Her machine untouchable. Stock was a memory, Nexus Tech a seedling onto million, but Aisha's life was his win. He'd fought, bled, streamed it raw to million, saw the truth, yet the system bent it backward. Grayson's pull choking justice again. Marcus stormed the precinct, slamming files, streams evidence they can't twist this. But the judge, same gray crony, set bail high, keeping Jamal caged. Then a crack split the dark. A juror from Grayson's indictment, a quiet woman named Ella, leaked texts to X late that night. 3 million views by dawn. Mayor bribed me 10 grand to convict Carter. Bury the tape, she wrote. Screenshots glowing, Grayson's orders. Vanessa's nudge, Slad's cash. Atlanta erupted again, protesters flooding streets. Hashtag Grayson busted trending as riots flared near City Hall. Jamal's cell buzzed with the news. A guard slipping him a phone, sympathy or fear. He didn't care. Ella's gold, he muttered, hope flickering. The juror's leak was a lifeline, proof their machine wasn't ironclad. A shot to flip it all. Stock was dead, but $2 million held. And Aisha was breathing. He had one last play. At her penthouse, Vanessa watched the juror leak hit, Pinot spilling as she gripped the glass to hard. Rick paced. Sweating, Ella's screwed us riots are back. Bigger, he snapped. Grayson's toast, she snarled, tossing the glass, shards scattering. He's not winning this, set it harder. Bury her. Grayson called, voice shaking. Fix it. Vanessa, she's traced it to me. She smirked. Cold, you're fine, I'm fine. Carter's still caged. The warehouse flip had worked. $2 million, saw a thug. Not a hero, but Ella's leak cracked it wide, and Jamal's fire burned louder. She'd crush it yet. Slad's goons her hammer, Grayson's cash her shield. Jamal sat in his cell, ribs a dull ache, the juror's texts a spark in the gloom. He'd saved Aisha, streamed the truth, felt the crowd's pulse. $2 million strong, only to watch Vanessa twisted into chains. Slade walked, Grayson bent, but Ella's leak was a blade, cutting their lies raw. Nexus Tech dangled by a thread, a seedling on grassroots cash, and Aisha's safety was his rock. He'd fought a war, jail, bullets, vandals, and this was his. Shot, they're rattled, he whispered, resolve hardening. But as the guard's boots echoed, he knew Vanessa's next hit was coming, and it had aimed to kill. Jamal Carter sat in a packed Atlanta courtroom, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. His wrists chafed from cuffs that had become too familiar. The trial was a circus. Reporters crammed the benches, protesters clashed outside. Their chants of justice for Jamal, shaking the windows. He faced assault charges from the warehouse fights, lads goons spinning him as the aggressor. Despite his live stream saving Aisha, and Vanessa's machine had twisted it tight. Her latest special painting him a monster. His navy suit was gone, swapped for a gray jail jumpsuit, but his eyes burned. Locked on the judge, a gray crony with Grayson's stench all over him. Marcus, his lawyer, stood beside him, weary and fierce, whispering, we've got Ella's leak, use it. Jamal nodded, ribs aching from the jail beating, resolve a steel rod in his spine. He'd represent himself, turn this cage into his stage. The prosecution opened, a slick DA with a Grayson handshake. Laying out the lie, Carter ambushed 5 men, unprovoked, violent, dangerous. Jamal stood, voice steady, cutting through the hum. I'm Jamal Carter, and I'm here 'cause I saved my sister. They kidnapped her, Slad's crew, Vanessa's puppets. $2 million saw it live. He held up a tablet, Marcus slipping it through screenshots of Ella's leak, Grayson's bribe. Slad's cash, Vanessa's nudge. This is their game, he said, pacing despite the pain. Eyes sweeping the jury, bribed jurors, fake charges. A bullet in my shoulder, 'cause I'm black and I built something they can't stand. The room buzzed. Jurors shifting, the DA sweating as Jamal shredded the script. He clicked the tablet, projecting texts on a screen. Grayson to Vanessa. Bury him, 10 grand per head. Slade to Rick, finish it. Warehouse wasn't enough. The crowd gasped, a woman in the back muttering, Jesus, as Jamal's voice rose. They framed me, drugs, theft, this fight, 'cause I exposed Ella's proof, my streams. Truth, I fought for Aisha, not 'cause I'm a thug, but 'cause they're scared. The judge banged his gavel, face red, order. But Jamal pushed on, ribs screaming. 73 patents, $2 million from you, the people keeping Nexus Tech alive. They want me silent, you decide if they win. He sat, breath ragged, the jury's eyes wide. The DA fumbling papers, Marcus grinned, whispering, you're a beast. The prosecution flailed, calling Scarface bandaged, limping to lie. He attacked us. Crazy. Jamal stood, calm as steel. Why'd you have my sister tied up? Stream shows it. $2 million saw you swing first. Scarface stammered, the judge glaring. But the jury leaned in, doubt cracking their masks. Ours bled into dusk evidence. Piling stream clips, Ella's texts, bank wires until the judge, cornered, snapped, enough. Deliberation took an hour, the room a pressure cooker as Jamal sat. Aisha safe at Marcus's. Her rescue is rock. The verdict came fast, not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Cheers drowning the gavel, reporters scrambling as Jamal stood. Free, a king reclaiming his crown. Outside, he faced a sea of faces, hundreds, fists raised. Jamal. Stock was dead, but 2 million held. Nexustech, a seedling reborn. Vanessa was fired that night, her network buckling under riots. Grayson's indictment sealed, Slad's lawyers silent. Jamal drove to Aisha's, the city alive with horns and shouts. His shoulders stiff but his spirit soaring. We did it, he told her, hugging tight. Her cast brushing his arm. She grinned, eyes wet. You did it. He crashed on her couch, dreaming of servers humming. A victory rally planned for dawn, his stand, his truth. A middle finger to the machine. Nexustech rose, scrappy and real, and he was on top, unbreakable. Then the bullet came. At the rally, a parking lot near Piedmont Park, thousands gathered, coders, kids, moms chanting his name under a crisp morning sky. Jamal stepped to a mic, voice booming. We're back, stronger, louder. Cheers roared, a wave of love. When a crack split the air, pain seared his skull, a sniper's shot grazing his temple. Blood trickling warm as he fell, crowd screaming. Aisha rushed him, hands shaking. Stay with me, as cops swarmed, too late. He clung to life, vision blurring, the shooter a ghost vanishing into the chaos. Slad's last card, Vanessa's echo. Paramedics hauled him off, sirens wailing. The rally a war zone, his empire teetering again. He woke in Grady, head bandaged, Aisha at his side, her cast a blur through the haze. You're alive, she whispered, gripping his hand. Barely, he rasped, pain a dull roar. News looped on the TV. Grayson indicted, Slad's assets frozen, Vanessa's firing final, but the shot flipped it all. Stock was a memory. 2 million holding Nexustech's pulse, yet his blood stained the pavement. A warning. Marcus stormed in, voice tight. Shooter's gone, no trace. Slad's denying, but it's him. Jamal nodded, jaw set. Vanessa's laughing somewhere. Online, her voice surfaced, a podcast teaser, off-air but venomous. This isn't over. Her machine was cracked, not dead, and he'd paid in flesh. At her penthouse, Vanessa watched the rally clip, Jamal falling, blood pooling, pin it in hand, her smile a jagged edge. Rick paced, sweating. He's alive, Grayson's done. Slad's cornered. He snapped. She shrugged, sipping slow. Alive's fine, scared's better. Podcast drops tomorrow, new angle. Grayson's call was gone, his empire ash, but she'd spin this. Jamal the martyr, her the truth teller. The trial had gutted her show, riots torched her rep, yet that laugh online was her dagger. Promising more, Slade raged in his tower, bourbon splashing. He's a roach, won't die, he snarled to a fixer. Next time, no graze. The machine creaked, but it rolled on, Jamal's blood its fuel. Jamal lay in the hospital, head pounding, Aisha's hand his anchor. He'd torn their lies apart, Tella's leak, his stream. The jury's not watching Vanessa fall. Grayson crack, Slade squirm. 2 million kept Nexustech breathing, a seedling in the rubble. And the crowd's roar was his crown, but that bullet grazed his skull, a whisper of death, flipping victory into war. His empire rose, scrappy and fierce, yet Vanessa's laugh lingered. Slad's ghost loomed, and Grayson's machine twitched. They're not done, he rasped, eyes on Aisha. Neither are we. The rally's echo faded, blood drying on his brow, and he knew the fight was alive. A beast he'd face again. Jamal Carter lay in his hospital bed at Grady Memorial, the antiseptic sting sharp in his nose, his head wrapped tight where a sniper's bullet had grazed his temple at the rally. Blood crusted the bandage, his shoulders still ached from the SWAT hit, and ribs throbbed from the jail beating, but he was alive, a battered king in a gown. Aisha sat beside him, her cast a stark white slash, her eyes fierce despite the exhaustion etching her face. The TV looped news. Grayson indicted, Slad's assets frozen. Vanessa fired, and 2 million in grassroots cash kept Nexustech's seedling alive. He'd torn their machine apart in court, turned the warehouse fight into his stand, and the crowd's roar. Thousands strong had crowned him, but that graze, Slad's ghost shot, flipped it all, a warning in blood. They're down, Aisha said, squeezing his hand. Not out. Jamal nodded, voice a rasp. Then we finish it. He launched the movement from that bed, phone in hand. Live to X again, 5 million views spiking to 10 an hour. This is for us, he said. Blood seeping through gauze, eyes locked on the lens. Tech hubs for the marginalized every block, every kid told they can't. To millions a start, donate, build, rise. The response was a tidal wave, billions poured in, not from suits, but from barbers, teachers, teens who'd chanted his name. Atlanta buzzed, hubs sprouting in southwest corners like his old block. Coders mentoring kids with laptops he'd once dreamed of. Nexus Tech flickered, a scrappy phoenix. And his trial Winella's leak. His stream buried Vanessa's show. Grayson's reign, Slad's pride. He walked out a week later, head bandaged, Aisha at his side. Crowds lining streets, fists raised, unbreakable. They yelled, and he felt it battered, bloody. But standing, the movement swelled, a national. Fire hubs in Chicago, Oakland, Detroit. Billions fueling dreams Vanessa's machine couldn't touch. Jamal spoke at rallies, voice booming over megaphones. We're the exception, no more success is ours. Stock was dead, but Nexus Tech thrived, small and fierce. 2 million growing to 5 as donors doubled down. Grayson faced trial, slayed. Hid in his tower, and Vanessa's firing stuck. Her network crumbling under boycott weight. Aisha healed, her cast off, running logistics for the hubs. Her grin his fuel. You did this, she said at a Decatur rally, thousands cheering. He smiled, headscar a badge, thinking he'd won Slad's bullet, Vanessa's lies. Grayson's bribes all ash. The movement was his empire, unkillable, a legacy for kids like him. Then the reversal hit. Vanessa's podcast dropped at midnight, a slick teaser blasting X 3 million views by dawn. Jamal Carter's truth, she purred, voice venom. Over silk, exclusive audio, he planned it all. The clip played his voice, flawless. Chilling, I staged the chaos mugshot, fights, even the shot for fame, for cash. It was a deep fake, sharper than Slad's, every inflection his. A lie so real it stole breath. X erupted, hashtag Jamal fraud trending. Half the world turning, donors pulling back, hubs teetering. Jamal watched from Aisha's apartment, coffee cold. In his hand, the scar itching as Vanessa's laugh cut deep. He's a con, she said. Podcast soaring to 5 million, a martyr by design. His chest caved. The movement billions strong, wobbling under doubt. Aisha burst in, laptop glowing, eyes blazing. It's fake, another Slade trick. She hacked the source, fingers flying, tracing it to Slade Corp's servers, a final play. 50 grand more to a deepfake whiz. They're desperate, she said, leaking the proof to X 2 million views, hashtag Slade lies spiking. The tide flipped. Slow but sure, fans roared back. Jamal's real, and Vanessa's podcast tanked. Her voice drowned by rage. Cops raided Slad's tower that night, cuffs snapping, his bourbon spilling as they dragged him out. Grayson's trial sealed him 10 years, and Vanessa faced conspiracy charges. Her penthouse dark, pin it untouched. The movement held, 5 million strong, hubs rising, Nexus Tech a beacon. Jamal stood at a rally, head high, truth won. He said, scar gleaming, crowd roaring. But whispers lingered. Half the world bought Aisha's hack, Slad's fall. Vanessa's jail, but half didn't. The deepfakes echo sticking like tar. Was it real? They murmured online. Hashtag Jamal fraud, a ghost that wouldn't die. Donors returned, hubs grew, yet doubt shadowed his crown. Billions fueled it. But some saw Akon, not a king. He sat in Aisha's kitchen, late, her spaghetti steaming, and smiled, unbroken. They'll always whisper, he said, voice steady. Let 'em. We know. She nodded, eyes wet. Pride fierce. He'd lost Nexus Tech's billions, taken bullets. Blood for this jail, vandals, frames, and risen. A movement, his legacy. The scar ached, a reminder. But he was free, Slade caged, Vanessa silenced. At Fulton County Jail, Vanessa sat in a cell. Jumpsuit stiff, her smirk gone. Pin at a memory. Slad's raid had cracked, her conspiracy tied to the deepfake. Grayson's bribes her noose. He won. She muttered, walls closing in. Her machine ash. Slade raged in his own cell. Bourbon dreams dead. Carter's a roach, his last. Snarl as cuffs bit. Grayson stared at bars, silver hair dull, his empire dust. Jamal's movement soared hubs in 50 cities, 5 million holding while their world collapsed. A reckoning he'd forged. Aisha's hack had saved it. Slads lie exposed, yet that whisper clung, a shadow he couldn't shake. Jamal stood on a rooftop, Atlanta sprawling below, the Chattahoochee glinting in dusk's glow. He'd launched from a hospital bed, bloodied, and bold 20 million views, riots, a trial wind turning Vanessa's hits into his fire. Nexus Tech was small, fierce, 5 million strong, hubs lifting kids he'd once been hungry doubted. Unbreakable, Slad's bullet, Vanessa's fakes, Grayson's cash-all cracked under his weight. Jail a memory, blood a badge, but that deepfake lingered, a splinter in the crowd's roar, half believed, half didn't, and he let it ride. Truth's mine, he murmured, wind tugging his jacket, Aisha's laugh echoing from below. He'd risen, fallen, risen again, scarred, steady, a king in the rubble. The movement rolled on. Hubs sprouting, kids coding where he'd starved. He spoke at a Chicago rally, voice booming. We're the future, they can't stop us. And thousands cheered, fists high. Vanessa's cell was cold. Slads towered dark. Grayson's name, a curse's stand, had buried them. A letter came that night, slipped under Aisha's door, a kid named Malik, 16. From his old block. Saw you fight, coding now cause. Of you, it read, pencil smudged. Jamal tucked it in his pocket. A quiet win, the whisper fading. He'd lost billions, blood rivers, but this was his hub's hope. A legacy Slad's bullet couldn't kill. Goes viral. 333 words. Jamal Carter's journey in this story is a raw testament to resilience against systemic racism and unrelenting adversity. The first lesson is the power of perseverance. Jamal faced jail, vandalism, bullets, and betrayal, yet rebuilt Nexus Tech from ash with 2 million in grassroots support, showing that grit can defy even the ugliest odds. Second, truth is a weapon, but it's fragile. His live streams and Ella's leak exposed Vanessa, Slade, and Grayson, but deepfakes and lies nearly buried him. Proving vigilance is key when fighting a machine that twists reality. Third, community is strength. 5 million from everyday folks, not suits, fueled his movement, highlighting how collective belief can topple power. Fourth, racism's roots run deep. Vanessa's venom, Slad's hits, and Grayson's bribes weren't just personal, they were systemic. A reminder that the fight's bigger than one man. Finally, victory isn't clean. Jamal won, launching hubs for marginalized kids, but whispers of doubt lingered, teaching us that scars and shadows are part of the battle. These lessons hit hard. Stand tall, wield truth, lean on your people, confront the system, and embrace the mess of triumph. Jamal's story isn't just his, it's a mirror for anyone facing hate's weight. So what's your takeaway? How would you fight if Vanessa's machine came for you? Comment below. Hit like if Jamal's fire inspires you. Subscribe for more racism stories that punch back. And share to spark the convo. Thanks for riding this wild tale with us. Here's to resilience, justice, and every dreamer who rises from the rubble. Stay unbreakable.